He'd seen how it was transforming financial markets, how it was transforming employment and the economy, and he stuck at it. He believed in it. He brought in the tech bros, and they felt that they were talking at last to a national leader who understood the same language. In the opposite side of him being weak at governing and ministerial life and political life was he did understand technology and AI.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government. I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda.
Commons has spoken, the Conservative Party has come together, the Rwanda bill has passed.
Whatever it takes to stop the boats, and that is precisely what this government will deliver.
My patience with this has worn thin.
I wonder over the last 5 years how much that loaf of bread has gone up by.
No, I don't have that figure to hand.
There have been lots of polls over the last year. There'll be hundreds more polls. The only one that matters is the one when the general election comes.
To the country, I would like to say, first and foremost, I am sorry.
Last gig I went to, Taylor Swift last year.
Rishi Sunak and Taylor Swift, a match made in heaven. Look, Rishi Sunak arrived in Downing Street promising stability. Less than 2 years later, he was leaving after an historic Conservative defeat. Between those two moments came Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, the battle over immigration, stop the boats, Rwanda, rebellions in his own cabinet. So what was really going on inside Downing Street during those extraordinary 20 months? Well, Sir Anthony Seldon has written political biographies of every Prime Minister since John Major. His latest is Sunak at 10, the last Conservative Prime Minister. Anthony Seldon, welcome to Times Radio.
Thanks for having me on, Hugo.
Thanks very much for being with us. Look, you've written about Prime Ministers for decades. When you finished this book, did you come away thinking Rishi Sunak was a Prime Minister who failed or a Prime Minister who never really got the chance to become the politician he might have been in better circumstances?
Yeah, more the latter. Look, we tend to judge Prime Ministers as if they're all on an even keel. It's much harder taking over at the end of a long period of government. No party in British electoral history has ever won 5 general elections on a trot. It had already won 4. He took over and the party was minus 30 in the polls. It had been plus 4 when Boris Johnson had taken over. It had sunk under Johnson and Truss from plus 4 to minus 30. He got it back to minus 10 and he lost the election. So Hugo, if the criterion is did he win the general election, he was a failure. If it is, did he bring economic stability as he promised? Did he restore Britain's relations with the EU and finish Brexit with the Northern Ireland Protocol, restoring power sharing in Northern Ireland and more? The answer is he did a lot. Could he have done more? Certainly, he could have done more. But it's it was a tough call taking over when he did.
I mean, it's almost irrespective of how well he did seem to never quite find the political language to express what his governing project was. Does he take some responsibility for it all looking a bit aimless?
Well, he did say on that clip you heard that his primary aim was to restore economic stability after the Truss fiasco, and 3 of his 5 priorities that he set out at the end of his second month in power were about the economy and getting the economy back on an even keel. So he did that. I think beyond that, he really didn't have the time. He was the youngest prime minister for 200 years. He didn't want to take over genuinely did not want to take over at the end of October after Liz Truss. He knew it in his bones. He knew it was only going to end one way. And he had to be persuaded genuinely, very heavily to do it. He would have liked very much to have taken over after Boris Johnson in early September when Liz Truss did take over. And he would still face many problems, not as many, and he still wouldn't have had a clear idea. I mean, he was beginning to get it. What does what does Britain need? It needs a fundamental rewiring of the British state. It needs to realize that AI is not just the latest technology, it's the biggest technology ever to hit this country or any country. He was rethinking how to remodel Whitehall. He introduced DSIT, which was the Science Department, Technology Department, which Burnham, I think, wrongly has got rid of.
But let's talk about.
I mean, he had embryonic, but he never look. He came into politics late. I mean, he'd only been at the Treasury. He knew very little about governing, and so he didn't have the time to frame it. It was all embryonic, and you know what it's like.
Yeah. Life moves pretty fast.
Once you're in that building,
I want to ask you about AI specifically, because it is something on which it's sort of one of the few areas where he really seemed to have sort of direction and belief. I mean, at the time, some people saw his enthusiasm for AI as perhaps bandwagon jumping. But do you think it was something he genuinely believed in? Was he a bit ahead of the political debate there on AI?
Of course he genuinely believed it. He had worked at. He'd been in Silicon Valley. He'd been at Stanford. He'd worked in that sector. He'd seen how it was transforming financial markets, how it was transforming employment and the economy, and he stuck at it. He believed in it. He brought in the tech bros, and they felt that they were talking at last to a national leader who understood the same language. In the opposite side of him being weak at governing and ministerial life and political life was he did understand technology and AI. So it was genuine. He expended a lot of political capital on it. The party, those people in the party who really didn't like him, which was a lot of the party, thought it was a waste of time, like they thought his spending a lot of political capital on the Windsor framework, which he battled on in his early months to get through. They thought that was a waste of time. They thought smoking, which will result in tens of thousands of people living who would not otherwise have lived, they thought that was a waste of time. The party wasn't really prepared to listen to everything. You know, through family connections, the John Major government. John Major, as you said, was the first of these political biographies that I wrote, and there were very similar reasons why they both had problems. And it suited everybody to trash John Major, just like it suits everybody, particularly followers of Kemi Badenoch, those who defected to reform, followers of Boris and Liz Truss. I mean, they all think, don't you know, that of course Sunak was apolitical, hopeless, and it's very convenient for them. But I don't think it's what history will say anymore than about John Major.
I want to ask you specifically about Kemi Badenoch in a moment. Before that, though, look, just to get a bit more of an idea of
definitely genuine. He was.
Yeah, sure.
Look,
understood.
He was Britain's.
Let's move on from that a little bit. I want to ask you about Stop the Boats, because that was a lot of people remember Rishi Sunak saying stop the boats a lot. He almost seemed to peg the fortunes of his government to that phrase, and indeed they declined as he failed to sort of exercise that phrase. But it sounds like almost like the opposite of the Sunak you described, because it was a very absolute, emotional, political kind of phrase. How did he understand what he was doing then? Did he understand that he was making a promise he might not be able to deliver? Did he believe in the Rwanda policy? Where did he stand on that, really?
Well, there are a lot of questions there. So he did not come into politics to spend his government trying to stop boats coming over from France or indeed immigration. He thought immigration, like many economists, was a good thing for the country, and to get overseas students coming to the country was equally a good thing. He's an open borders person, so it was ironic that perhaps the most dominant, certainly the most politically sensitive issue on his watch was stop the boats and immigration. So he genuinely thought he had extraordinary belief in his ability, to engineer solutions. All his life, he had used that extraordinary brain that he had, an ability to work harder than anyone to drill down to the heart of a problem and to solve it. He was way ahead of Suella Braverman, as countless people told us, Tom Edgerton and I, when writing this book, on understanding the intricacies of what was really happening on immigration and illegal immigration. And so he thought he could do it. He didn't do it with the enthusiasm he had for many of the other policies, including education and national public service, etc. We haven't talked about. But he recognized this is what he had to do. It was one of his 5 priorities. He liked the idea of stop the boats because it had the same kind of binary clarity that the pronouncements had during COVID. And so he did like that. And he expended an enormous amount of time drilling down, trying to make it work. Couldn't. Macron wasn't very biddable. Macron had put him down as a Brexiteer. Couldn't wait for Starmer to take over, who was far more to Macron's taste. So the French were not helpful, but that was, that was in part an excuse, but in part real. And did he believe in Rwanda? No. He would much not have done Rwanda, but he came to see that Rwanda, as a unpleasant deterrent, was the necessary medicine to deter people coming over who otherwise thought that coming to the UK was going to be a land of milk and honey.
How much of a problem was it for his entire government? He had kind of the ghost of Boris Johnson hanging around over his shoulder. Boris Johnson, who of course couldn't quite accept that his premiership was over and was cross that it had been over.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson had talked, didn't he, like a Cincinnatus going off to his farm. Well, when the moment came and Liz Truss collapsed, Boris was on a farm. It was actually a health farm in the Caribbean, and he suddenly saw his chance. Boris was desperate to come back. He was then told by his team that he didn't have enough votes, but he would if he could get Sunak behind him. So he made Sunak a promise that an offer to effectively, like Gordon Brown under Tony Blair, running the domestic side of the country, but Sunak turned that down. But Sunak, on his turn, had to make a Faustian pact to Braverman because he wasn't certain that he could do it without her and her votes, and that's what he did, and that proved a Faustian pact because she was never, and her team were never minded to be team players. And indeed, it was tough. Look, it was tough. If you have your 2 predecessors and their acolytes actively undermining you, and if you have 3 or 4 would-be successors actively being uncooperative or more, that makes it more difficult on top of everything else.
Look,
but
one of the more explosive claims, we're nearly out of time, but one of the most explosive claims in the book is that Kemi Badenoch was actively exploring whether there was support for replacing Sunak while he was Prime Minister. How important was that internal plotting to his eventual collapse? I mean, he must have known about it. It must have undermined him constantly.
Well, from the very beginning, they knew in Number 10 that the madness, as they said, had to stop. That's exactly, the madness meaning the infighting. That's exactly why he brought in people across the political spectrum, supporters of Truss, supporters of Boris, supporters of Mordaunt, supporters of Braverman, and Badenoch and Jenrick. So he had a broad-based government, which made it much more difficult to manage cabinet. It was massively undermining to him in 2 ways. One, in terms of the cogency of what he was trying to do, that he was constantly battling his party. And secondly, in terms of the perception, they knew that infighting, Isaac Levido, the campaigner who'd planned it all, said, we got a very thin chance of winning in 24. Our only chance is if the madness stops and if we all pull together. The infighting polls are very clear. Damaged the party's perception and made the party do worse. So what about What about Kemi Badenoch? Well, she herself denies that she was actively plotting, and she denies that she wanted Rishi Sunak to go. Others said that she was certainly interested, and that they say that if she thought that she had a chance, enough votes to unseat him, she would have done so. So that's where we are with that story. But collectively, all these people coming together, and then the defections to reform, the resignations, high profile. I mean, the screechingly, almost incoherent Braverman letter of resignation and others. It was very destabilizing. He called the early general election because he feared more people would leave the party.
I'm afraid
a brave man.
We must leave it there. Sir Anthony Seldon, thanks very much indeed for your time. I'm sorry we didn't have more of it. That is Sunak at 10, the last Conservative Prime Minister, ? And it's available to order at the Times Bookshop, where Times Plus members can get a 20% discount. Just visit timesbookshop.co.uk.